Hello, everyone. Welcome to yet another episode of Code and Coffee Show. Yeah, it's a Code and Coffee Show because those are the two most important things in life of every developer, right? Because we have to have our veins fill out with caffeine, and thanks to this, we can convert it into some amazing code. Like, for example, today, because we never did something like this, we will have kind of a case study. We will discuss how Kristof, who is with me, and together, of course, with his team, added a public API to a service that was already working, already generating quite a lot of revenue, and they had to do it in a way that it won't destroy anything, won't interrupt anything. And like I said, Kristof is with me because he is a lead developer at Kinsta. He's responsible for both DevKinsta and its public API. He's an Amsterdam newcomer, originally from Budapest. So, Kristof, did I mention everything, or maybe I forgot about something? Maybe you have some more secret powers, talents.
Yeah, Maciek, thanks a lot. It was quite enough. So I, of course, have some secret powers, but some of them I want to keep secret. So let's just go ahead. It's fine. So thank you very much.
Okay, yeah, I mean that's a very good decision. I mean, if you have secret superpowers, they should be secret. I mean, there's nothing worse when we are talking about publicly about secret stuff. It's kind of cool.
Yes,
but before we will dive into the world of the public API, first let's talk about coffee because it's the Code and Coffee Show. So, are you a coffee drinker?
Yes, I actually have had already 3 today, so I'm pretty much a coffee drinker. I'm not overdoing it, but I think for keeping alive during the working hours and stuff like that, it's pretty much fun. And also on the weekend, enjoying it a little bit later, like after waking up like 2 hours later, then having a nice coffee is always good. So waking up to its kind of smell is kind of quite satisfying for me.
Okay, that's really nice to hear. Because if I remember, because we had the chance to meet each other in Amsterdam, but I don't think we had it. Oh no, we had the chance to drink coffee together on the conference, but
yes.
I mean, for me it was horrible. You said it wasn't that bad, so yeah.
Yeah, I mean it was just a regular coffee, so we had coffee together, but nothing special for sure. Yeah, but the conference was great at least. So
that's true. The JS World was amazing. And tell me, what is your favorite type of coffee? Do you have any?
So basically, when I go to a coffee place, so where I can just buy coffee and they make it for me, then basically I usually ask for Americano. So I don't have any specific type which I really prefer. So currently I have some Australian one at home because I saw that in the local shop it was kind of discounted, and I saw it's strange or interesting for me, so I just bought it. But I'm not really a gourmet in this, so I don't know all the types and stuff like that. But usually I ask for Americano, and when I just want a shot, then espresso, double espresso. So at least that deepness I have, that I know a couple of types, but not really the deep parts.
I mean, the good part is that you are in Amsterdam, and Amsterdam has so many great places to visit.
Yeah, especially coffee shops, right? But you don't get coffee there. So.
Yeah, this might be a bit tricky in Amsterdam. Hey, where I will find the best coffee shop?
Yeah, there are a lot around, but please pick the one that is really selling coffee, right? So
this one.
It's not that easy.
Yeah, exactly. But still, there is this great application, European Coffee Trip, and you can find those coffee places with coffee in Amsterdam, and they are really interesting. The only thing that kind of surprised me in Amsterdam about coffee places was that in so many places you can't use your laptop, so you can't just sit there and code while drinking your coffee. You just have to either talk with other people or things like this.
How horrible talking to other people.
How horrible, right? Yeah.
No. I mean, what I usually do, I go to this place called Folks Hotel, and that place is basically, first of all, a cafe and restaurant, and also it's a hotel, and also it's a co-working space. So what they do is they have a separation. So they have half of the room for laptops and stuff like that. So I usually work there like 2 or 3 times a week. And then the other part of the place is bar and coffee and stuff like that. So it also has this separation. So wherever you have the coffee and the drinks and things like that, there you cannot open up your laptop. But the other place is for laptops, and you can also bring your coffee there. So I usually take my time, in the co-working part, and once it's done, then I just maybe sit in for something for the bar and maybe have coffees during the day and stuff like that. So it's pretty nice. Also, I worked in regular cafes as well, where they didn't kick me out, but I think they start building kind of a business model out of it, that you have a cafe and also co-working space at the same place, and you have all the equipment that is required for a lightweight, working environment. So that's pretty cool.
Oh yeah, that's true. I mean, I kind of understand those coffee places because from their perspective, this one developer who ordered one coffee and is trying to debug one thing for 3 hours. Yeah. It's really bad for the business, and probably that person is also swearing a lot under his nose. Because, why it's still not working. And
we are not the most attractive people in the world, so they have other guests who attract more guests to the place. But if you are the first person to come to the coffee place, then I think you can still be good, because then at least one person is sitting there, which is kind of an attractive thing to a place. So then the second one will come easier.
True, right. Okay, so I know enough about your coffee experience, and you will probably, you will after the show get some great Polish coffee too. So you will have a chance to try something new. But yeah, let's dive into the public API. So before we start talking even about the APIs, let's start. What is Kinsta? I mean, I know what is Kinsta because we both work there. So,
yes.
But you should explain it a bit, what we are doing there.
Yes, so basically Kinsta is a cloud hosting or a platform as a service company, to be more like a vague or more general about it. So basically Kinsta made its reputation as a WordPress host. So we are kind of one of the key players in the WordPress hosting industry. So from there on, we want to extend our services, and we already started to extend our services to this general hosting topic, so that we can host applications like Node.js, Python, Go, or whatever. And also a static site, which is a new coming service. So we will have that as well soon, but that's kind of still under the hood. So these are the things that we are developing right now. So this basically means that we are a WordPress host and we are quite successful in it. So we still want to keep that kind of reputation while opening up to a bigger world, which means that we need to be a little bit more developer focused than we were when we were just a WordPress host. It's quotation marks, because being a WordPress host and being good at it is quite good, but also we need to consider these new types of businesses we are joining at the moment. So that's roughly it. So Kinsta, famous for its WordPress hosting, but we are also opening up to be a kind of general platform as a service provider.
Mm-hmm. Yes, and so yeah, and this is like the first thing. So why we needed this? Why Kinsta needed the API? I mean,
yeah. So basically, of course, it's quite obvious that if you are developer focused, then an API is the starting point to everything, because APIs are the things that connect the web, they connect developers, and they connect applications to each other, basically. But to start a little bit more in the past, so basically, as a WordPress host, we already had this demand. So basically, for years, we are getting requests for opening up our platform with a publicly supported API, because, of course, maybe WordPress site administrators are not always the people who start to build their own automations on APIs and stuff, but there are people who are dealing with scale. If, for example, someone has 100 of sites hosted at Kinsta, and there are people having hundreds of sites, there are even people who have like above 1,000 sites at Kinsta. They are kind of very much interested in doing things automatically. And for example, so we are pretty proud of how good user experience MyKinsta, our customer-facing dashboard, provides at the moment. But if you imagine that you need to kind of update all the themes and plugins for WordPress sites for like 100 sites, then you might want to just make it, periodic. You want to make it automated. And in a lot of cases, we just prioritize these needs down a little bit, because we kind of had the vast majority of our customers who were not interested in this. And by opening up to this new topic of being a platform as a service and kind of offering different things, kind of experimenting whatever the platform is capable of, we kind of had the general motivation to start with this API development, so that we actually picked this topic up, which was always there between the different topics that we were dealing with. But now we actually, 1 year ago or something like that, we picked this up and started with an MVP. And since then, we actually developed a lot more new features, or I will talk about it later. It's not really developing features because the features are there. So, the platform actually knows a lot of things. You just need to have a point to access it. So this is kind of a new way of interacting with Kinsta services at the moment. Yeah.
Yeah, and we also have to remember that there was one more group. It was a one-person group called Austin Ginder, who even created. He kind of backported our MyKinsta API. So really, kudos for him. He did an amazing job, and I'm sure that he will be happy that at some point he will be able to switch everything into the official API, and he won't have to kind of maintain his
hack around his way. I mean, we are pretty glad about or glad for his contributions, and still, like whenever we kind of have any user research, he is one of the people who always interacts with us and shares his views on whatever the API should be capable of. So of course, this is a tricky thing because of course Kinsta always had APIs. So of course, when we actually implement a service like WordPress for different services for WordPress, like adding a new environment or something like that, for sure there is some backend that handles it. So if you kind of go to the network tab and see whatever it's happening in the background behind MyKinsta, then you will see some requests. But it's different to kind of have APIs which kind of do the job for MyKinsta itself, and it's different to maintain a public API that is kind of needs to be stable. It needs to be versioned. It needs to be kind of it shouldn't break the existing code, and the existing code is not anymore just the code that we write for MyKinsta or DevKinsta or whatever client application we deliver, but also many and kind of unlimited amount of applications that rely on it around the world. And this is what we didn't have the focus on previously, but now with the public API, we have a version of our interface that is basically maintained and documented and officially supported. So that's the main difference between those two use cases.
I kind of see that you partially answered one of my next questions. I wanted to ask about the biggest challenges you encountered during planning, and I can imagine that the way how we approach it, right, between the code that is just created for like inside usage and for the code that is created for everyone. Were there any other challenges that you had during let's call it the planning phase?
Yeah, so during the planning phase, for sure, always one of the major things is to collect insights from the user. So even though we have a bunch of existing features, it's very important to kind of know what's the most important, what we should solve first, what's the easy win kind of things, which we can expose to the API quite quickly, and we get a lot of usage immediately and stuff like that. So we had a couple of rounds of research for that. So maybe at this point, I would just share my screen quickly and then show you maybe starting from the API documentation that whatever we are capable of at the moment, and then just kind of demonstrate whatever I'm talking about at the moment. So Maciek, if you could maybe that.
Of course. Oh, now it's a beautiful infinite loop.
Yeah, the infinite loop. So sorry, I will cut the infinite loop in a second. So basically, this is currently the newest version API documentation of Kinsta API. So what you see on the left-hand navigation bar is that we have a bunch of features, and these are kind of divided by our main services. So basically, we have WordPress hosting at the moment. We have application hosting and database hosting, and a couple of endpoints, which are just utilities. So these are kind of 4 different things that are connected to the other endpoints. But to just talk about the main services first. So you see that we have a bunch of things for WordPress. And so currently, the majority of Kinsta users are WordPress users, and those people were asking for API for ages, as I said. And in the first research rounds, basically we needed to kind of consider their needs while actually also opening up things for the application hosting, because we want to expand very much into that direction. So it was kind of one challenging thing to prioritize well. And for first time, we actually delivered like 5 endpoints, and that was the first MVP version of the public API. But as you see, currently it has a whole bunch of different CRUD operations, different tools that you can automate things with. So like, for example, these kind of chore jobs, which are usually done after deployments for WordPress sites, or after new versions are getting deployed, these are kind of quite important. Also, we are able to manage caches and stuff like that. And these endpoints are basically all implemented because of different user feedbacks. So still, we are kind of very much listening to whatever is coming in from the user side. So we have different channels, and they are talking to us a lot. And this kind of thing to start with some priorities in the beginning was challenging, but so far I think it's getting more and more, interesting because users start to use it. So users started to use it, and then we kind of started to understand whatever they need. And so basically now I feel like we have a kind of, connection to our users that makes it much easier. So that's basically about this user side of the things from the planning phase. But also, I think you can imagine that kind of delivering a public API is not just that, okay, now I start writing endpoints, then deploy it to some kind of cloud provider and then be happy, but you need to kind of decide on a lot of tools. So I will talk about tools a little bit later, but I think just to kind of kick it off and get it publishable, we basically need to pick 3 or 4 major tools that we are using. We needed to pick the technology stack. We needed to pick kind of the way how it interacts with other parts of the system that we are maintaining, the documentation platform, how to detect breaking changes and stuff like that. So all these things were quite challenging and needed a lot of research. So if you would kind of see the beginning of our project and its Jira tracking, then I think kind of the majority of the items were research and look after it in kind of the internet and stuff like that. So that was quite a challenging part of the project as well. So yeah, that's kind of the second thing. And maybe the third thing, which I actually touched previously about having the internal APIs and then building a public API. For that, I would just show one diagram, which is, of course, far from being perfect because I just created it in the very beginning. It's V1. So this is kind of the high-level imagination in my head about the public API. So that at one point, we will have some guy who is definitely not looking like this. It's not the thin or stuff like that, but you can imagine that we have some kind of a guy who is using the API, most probably. And basically, on top of the whole thing, we have a bunch of things which are kind of client specific. So we have a client application that the customer might build. At one point, we might give the users some kind of Kinsta build client. So a CLI could be something like this, but kind of bots, Slack bot or whatever like that can be also similar. There can be some kind of software development kits or SDKs, which are, just libraries or different sets of tools that you can kind of build from an API. And below that, basically, is whatever the API is. So it's kind of an interface that kind of connects our users to our services. And behind that, I'm just, jumping a bit bigger right now. So basically, we have a bunch of business logic implemented in different services. So there's Kinsta for sure, but we also have a couple of other things like microservices, which are basically, kind of parts of our system, and they already have some APIs. So the question was that how we actually expose them. And of course, the obvious answer, without going very much into the deeper details, is that you might want to create some kind of a new service, which is we call the API service. And basically, in our case, this is a gateway. So this kind of plays the role of a gateway, while the heavy lifting is basically done by some other layers of the application. This way we can, kind of streamline the development process as well, so that we don't need every team to contribute to the public API, while they are still contributing because they develop state-of-the-art APIs, so that we can expose state-of-the-art endpoints to the public API as well. So that's basically roughly how we approach this problem. But in the beginning, of course, we had a lot of versions that we wanted to discuss. There were a lot of different theories that we might, just dropped away. Then we created POCs in a lot of cases, so that it was a kind of tough decision, or a lot of tough decisions to make. But I think we kind of made some decisions that are kind of maintainable and are good for us by the time of now. So I think that was pretty fine, yeah.
And out of curiosity, because I'm sure that we are living in this open source world, yeah. And did you take a look at the competition, and did you check how they solved some problems to get some inspiration?
Yeah, I mean, of course, we had a lot of look at different projects. Of course, the public API and how it's connected to the infrastructure, it's not really public in case of our customers, but we know that this kind of, API gateway pattern is a standard thing. So a lot of companies do that. Basically, they have different services in the background, then they create different gateways for different purposes. So for example, a gateway can be responsible for just, being a facade in front of a front-end application, for example, fulfilling all its needs, but nothing else, or it can be a public-facing API or whatever. So it just depends on whatever the role of this gateway is. But I think the most important thing is kind of making use of the best practices from the industry, making use of the best solution that we can do and apply it for the development organization that is behind the whole thing. So I guess that's what we try to do. Of course, time will kind of prove whether it was a good decision or not. There is always a way back. So I'm not saying that it has no drawbacks at all. Of course, there can be things when we kind of lack there is a lack of room for us to customize things just because we rely on other teams and their product and stuff like that. But I think that's still better than building everything from scratch for sake of the public API. So that's of course obvious.
Yes, okay. So we have the planning phase kind of out of the window. Everything is prepared. Yeah. It's ready. So yeah, it's kind of time to start coding. And how did it look like? Because you already mentioned that there were already some APIs down there. So so I can imagine that you had to kind of coordinate a lot of work with other teams for them also to kind of change their APIs to make everything compatible, everything working together, right? Or maybe it looked a bit different.
Yeah, I mean, of course, as I said, because of this architecture, everyone's contribution is required. So the kind of vision is that the whole company, the whole development organization is building this public API. So that's for sure like that. So how much of communication is required? I think in the beginning, like still right now, we kind of have the need for a lot of communication because we are not yet in the end of kind of preparing all the practices that will make it a little bit more automated. But on the other hand, kind of by just applying the best practices on all hands, it would be kind of, less need for communication. But for the time being, I think it's pretty important that everybody understands that whatever they develop as APIs is a product on its own. So it's not that you kind of open a pull request where you develop the front end, the back end, and then it's a working feature. And you just make everything possible on the back end side to make the front end happy, and that's it. But your API itself is also a product. So that's kind of the mentality that needs to be changed if you are kind of developing public API and you didn't have it previously, because there will be different API parts, different API features which won't be ready for just being published as it is, because you built it with the mentality of delivering a feature. And that's not the kind of API first approach of thinking about these things, because if you think about it in an API first way, then probably you're gonna think about your API from the beginning as a product. And if you kind of in the situation where we were, where it didn't happen because you didn't think about your API as a product in the beginning, because Kinsta's the biggest value that we added was more the UX that we gave for WordPress users and how easy it is to click together things on the dashboard. It was not in the focus, but by opening up to this new type of users, it was a focus change, and now we need to kind of apply those best practices. And this is why currently still I think of my team, and that's why it's really good that my team is full of very experienced and really talented engineers. That I kind of think about my team as a ambassador of good API development inside the organization. So our major goal would be to kind of talk to other teams and establish the standards which are fitting their needs, which are good for us as providers of the public API, and at the same time make the whole collaboration very easy. So I think this is one cultural thing that we need to kind of establish to really be successful. But I think there are good signs in this topic already, and we made a lot of progress. So I guess that's fine. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, this is also a bit fascinating because most of the time, most people imagine that developing is mostly about writing code, and now we are saying that probably you spend much more time on research than on talking, on coordinating, and the code was like the last thing that even wasn't it even wasn't the hardest part of it, right? So I can really imagine.
I didn't write all the code, so maybe for me it wasn't the hardest, but maybe when I wrote code, it was not that hard because I think we have quite good standards that we follow, and also we leverage other services functionality. But of course, yes, so it's kind of research heavy, kind of exploration, culture, changing people's mindset a little bit, and so on. So I think it's a lot of those things, but of course, at the same time, there is a lot of technology behind. So I would say from a technology stack point of view, we also there is nothing very, very special because, of course, the API service, as I said, is just a gateway. So it's kind of an Express Node.js server. At Kinsta, by the way, we like JS TypeScript very much. So it's written in TypeScript because we prefer it. So for maintaining bigger things, it's good. Now we are not building any more that big things because we kind of do a microservice mindset, but still we stick to TypeScript because this is kind of dictating us good standards to follow and so on. It's still kind of beneficial for us. And at the same time, while using TypeScript, there is one more quite important piece of the tech stack of the API, which is Zod. This is a very nice library. So I'm not sure if the audience knows Zod. Maybe I just quickly share the screen and scroll into the documentation because it's worth maybe having a look. So just a sec. Yep. So let me know if it's visible already.
Yes.
Yes. So Zod.
It's visible.
If anyone would not know it, it's a validation library basically, but it's a little bit more than that, in my opinion, because what you can do is basically create schemas in it. And if you think about it a little bit, then API development is more or less, whatever I talked about, a lot of research, of course, about different things. But on the other hand, what you do is basically create a schema for your users that they can kind of, or for the consumers, sorry, that they can, expect the API to return, to be able to code with, like for the request and response and so on. And Zod is a very strong library for that. So basically what we do right now is kind of Zod is around each and every part of our development process. So first of all, whenever we create an endpoint, then most of it is a definition of a schema in Zod. So basically we define the data types, we define whatever the endpoint accepts as body, as query parameters, or as URL parameters and so on. Then basically this Zod schema is the one from which we then generate OpenAPI specifications. So for that, we actually use another library. This is a little bit of a trick, but there is this Zod to OpenAPI library, which nothing else but a wrapper for this Zod that you can just, say that, okay, now you create an endpoint, say that there's a method and different OpenAPI specific things you can add to your endpoint, to your Zod schema. And basically from here on, we are kind of automated and we just, generate that OpenAPI specification. So I just, show some web pages, but I think most of you know what's kind of a OpenAPI specification is. So this is a standard way of describing APIs. It can be done with JSON, it can be done with YAML. We prefer YAML, but it really doesn't matter. So basically what we do is just, leverage the Zod schema and create an OpenAPI specification out of it. And from there on, you will get some kind of nice API documentation like this, which is, by the way, hosted on Reductly. So that's another tool that we are using. And from there on, you can do whatever you want. So from an OpenAPI specification, you can also create SDK. So maybe there will be a customer-facing SDK at one point for the API that users can just grab to build features more easily in any kind of programming language with our API and stuff like that. So OpenAPI is, in my opinion, a very powerful thing. So it is also a quite powerful thing. And the combination of the two is kind of a good thing that we kind of use all the time for the API. And even in case of the API tests, because we also have a huge test coverage for our API from end-to-end tests, we also kind of leverage the power of these Zod schemas to validate whether the endpoint really returns whatever is described in the Zod schema and so on. So this is kind of a powerful things that let's say we rely on it a bit, but I think relying on Zod is not a bad idea because it's a very, widely used and accepted library. So.
Oh yes, it is. It is. I mean, I learned about Zod from a totally different way because it's also used in Astro to verify Markdown files if all the data is as it should and
yes.
all the files. So yeah, Zod is very universal, and as you can see, we can use it both in Markdowns and in the API. So
and also, as you heard, I think you remember JS Word when we heard about TRPC, this typed RPC when you can kind of develop without big separation between front end and back end. And there they also kind of leverage from Zod, if I'm not mistaken. So that was also kind of something where it was very useful. So that's why I'm saying relying on it is a good idea, because if you actually, or I'm not saying relying on anything is a good idea for sure, that's a bad way of saying, but I would say if I have to rely on something, then it could be Zod, because it's just used for things which will, I think, represent the future of web development, like TRPC and stuff like that. So, and Astro as well, as you mentioned. So in my opinion, if you rely on things which are, the backbones of the future of web development, then I think you are at a great place. So that's fine, I guess.
That's true. And tell me, were there any more tools that you used during your development? Because I can imagine that, developing such an API with, especially with a bigger team and everything, probably had, created some problems, and there were probably some tools that you used to.
Yeah, and also I mentioned that we actually used we did a lot or spent a lot of time with researching. So now I have to present some tools for sure, because if the research was spent with nothing, then there's no point. So yeah, we came up with a bunch of tools. So basically, what you saw, like this, sorry, it's against the web page. This is API documentation. So basically, this is built with Redux, for example. As I said, there is a whole tool chain behind with Zod and OpenAPI and stuff like that. But in the end, it's hosted in Redux. So this was one of the first decisions we made. And the main point behind the decision was that Redux is a platform that supports documentation as code very well. So everything that is in that documentation is written as code. And it's not only that OpenAPI specification, because the one would think that, okay, now we just, transform OpenAPI specification to an HTML and that's it. But this is a collaboration. So what we do is create, the Zod schema. Then generation of OpenAPI spec is kind of obvious out of it. But on the other hand, there is also a team to actually write meaningful documentations for our customers. And the documentation writer is opening pull requests in our repository, adding markdown files, which markdown files will be bound to this API documentation. And if you see this, for example, I never wrote this, or any of our dev team never wrote this introduction. This is basically for a task for another team who are experts in writing technical content. And this collaboration is made possible by Redux, and also the fact that we can now build some sort of documentations via pull requests, we can review them and so on, is, I think, again, a very nice thing that we introduced at Kinsta, because I was always a big fan of Doc as code. Now at Kinsta, I don't really have impact on how we write documentations and so on, but for the API itself, I had impact, and I really wanted to establish it with the Doc as code way. So that's a big pro, I think, for Redux. I'm not saying that there are no other tools around. There is readme.io, there is Swagger, and so on, but we chose for this time Redux. So that was one tool. I mentioned it previously as well, but this was one major decision. So I talked about what it is, breaking change detection as well. So I just wanted to kind of emphasize one nice tool, which is called Optic. So this Optic, useoptic.com, is something I found quite recently, and then we started to apply it in our workflow. So this platform, they start building a platform now, but in principle, it's a CI or CLI tool. It makes it possible to kind of, based on Git history, compare OpenAPI specifications and then detect breaking changes and draw a nice history out of it. So this is kind of a quite obvious need when it comes to APIs, but very surprisingly, apart from Optic, I didn't find too many open source tools for specifically covering the breaking change detection for REST APIs. So we had breaking change detection in our background. So we have some GraphQL microservices which basically use Apollo as a solution, and Apollo has this breaking change detection, which is really nice, and it's like built in, it's managed and so on. But very surprisingly, for the most convenient and conventional and kind of traditional API type, the REST API, there is no such thing, which is like very nice and easy to use. There are, of course, many platforms out there. So I wouldn't be surprised if, for example, things like Google's APIG or something like that would know such a thing. But those are, of course, super expensive things, and they know a lot of things that you don't necessarily need and stuff like that. So, for example, this Optic knew everything that we wanted to do, because, as I said, the OpenAPI spec generation is fully automated and it's source code native. So in that case, I just need to apply this nice platform, and you see some people who are quite nice are using it basically. And this is a set of tools, and now we are kind of evaluating whether we want to use their platform as well, or just the CLI, because they have a free version, which is just a CLI that will tell you whether it's breaking or not. And that's what we needed for the first time, but maybe we will, also just leverage other functionalities because we like what we see. So I'm just saying that because this platform is not that famous. I didn't hear it before I did the research for the API, and I think they do quite cool things. So this is one more tool that I would mention. And of course, API development. So there are a couple of other things. So we also write automated API tests. By the way, it's quite a nice thing that we have a nice test coverage. And at the moment, what we do is use super test for it. So this is kind of a conventional thing, or quite, a lot of people are using it because what it provides is a very pure way of just, sending requests. So with this request object and Fluent API and so on. And basically, what else we need to add is a testing framework. So here it's in the example, it uses the just the regular assert, but in our case, it's Jest. So whatever you want to use, you can use with this framework. So this is where we write our automated API test. This is the first place, but there is another place where we also write automated API tests, which are for a different reason and also for a little bit of experimentation. This is Postman, of course. Every API team uses Postman, but what I wanted to emphasize a little bit is that we also started to experiment with Postbot a little bit, which is I think everybody is on the wave of the artificial intelligence hype at the moment. So this is a wonderful thing that you can just, type a sentence and then it will spit out a lot of API tests for you. So we also have a set of tests which are partly generated by this. I wouldn't say that it's perfect. And I also did not do it. So I experimented in my project, like personal projects as well. But one of our team members did it and she did a great job with it. So I think this is also a very, very promising tool that I think will characterize the work of a lot of API developer teams. So all the AI things that are usable and user-friendly, they are really great. And of course, for development, we also use GitHub Copilot. So this is now enabled for everybody. So that's a big thanks for Kinsta, because we basically have the company subscription on GitHub and GitHub Copilot as well. So all the team members have access to this nice auto-completion feature at the moment. And beyond that, we also have the new, the chat. So that when you actually have the integrated chatbot in the VS Code, so that's also awesome. I'm not saying that it's as clever as the ChatGPT itself at the moment. So it sometimes needs a little bit more prompting to be accurate and stuff like that. But I think that's also something really nice. So we are kind of early adopters of these nice AI tools at the moment. So that's pretty nice in my opinion. So this is kind of what I wanted to emphasize. Probably there are other tools as well that we are using, but now there is nothing that's coming into my mind, but these are, I think, worth sharing a lot.
Yeah, you mentioned about the Postman AI, and I also must agree that it's really amazing. It's really amazing, especially if you have your API that you develop for some time, and for some reason you never had enough time to write tests. I'm not saying it's a good thing, but let's be honest, it happens more than not. And Postman can really create a lot of those basic tests that will, who knows, maybe prevent you from breaking something. I was really surprised when I give it a simple test with the famous Star Wars API. I just connected it and I asked it to write some tests for, if I remember, only for the characters. And it wasn't perfect. It required some corrections. For example, because the AI assumed that the gender of can be either male or female, and it was Star Wars, so there were a lot of robots. And in this Star Wars API, it was considered as a separate gender. So I had to do this one fix that gender can be this, or this. But still, I had a huge amount of tests written in literally 30 seconds that required 1 minute of fixes. And like I said, it wasn't perfect. Probably it did not cover everything, but I already, if I would be developing the Star Wars API, I would already feel much safer that I won't release some breaking changes. So if you never try this Postman API, AI, give it a try. It's really great. I'm not sure is Insomnia also having such a thing.
Yeah, that's a good question. I know Insomnia. I preferred it over Postman for a long time, basically because it's a little bit more lightweight for me. And Postman, I think, in some cases becomes a little bit more over ambitious. That you have a lot of things for API design and stuff, where you would only need to send a request. So that I think they actually have some lightweight version already, or they plan to have one at least. Also, they have a VS Code extension now, so that's also pretty good. I think they just released it a couple of months ago. That it's now kind of stable, working fine. It doesn't contain all the features of Postman, but maybe we don't need all the features of Postman for sure. So I think that's just good. And one more thing about this Postbot, their AI thing. So even if the tests which it spits out are completely wrong, then still for a beginner who never wrote a test in Postman, they will be the samples. So you can just copy paste and write the correct test based on that. So if it doesn't help anything else, then it helps at least with creating your first test, and then it's a good thing. So for me, it was kind of accurate. The only thing that I actually missed from the whole Postman concept a little bit and how it works is that when you actually want to create negative test cases and positive test cases, then you need to create separate request examples out of it. So it's not enough for it if you have like negative and positive example in the API specification itself, but you need to create a new request, which is, I think, a little bit cumbersome. So it's not a fault of the AI bot, but it's more a Postman thing. But I think the one can live with that, and to some extent it makes sense. I think there is big thinking behind that kind of approach at Postman, so I think they know what they do. So I think this is one of the most important tools for a developer of an API, of course.
Yeah, I totally agree here. And so we kind of covered the tech stack, the tool stack, and now like of the two questions. First of all, which part of this whole project are you the most proud of?
Yeah, so I have a couple of things to be proud of. So for sure, basically it's hard to phrase in just words, but I think the API maintainer team, as you said, it is also responsible for DevKinsta, and I can already tell that we are basically building other products as well, which will be customer facing, kind of similar topics, similar kind of audience to whatever we have been building so far. So first of all, what I'm the most proud of is, of course, the team, because now you're talking to me. I'm kind of on the top of this pyramid, and I'm saying pyramid because it's at least 3 products at the same time. But I have a lot of internal responsibilities in the team. I have a lot of things that are completely handled by other people than me. So they are not just in my hands that I need to take care of every single thing. I actually prefer to still be on the technical side and develop different features on my own as well, and also take part in the design decisions. And the team is who actually makes it possible for me, because if I would if I needed to manage the whole thing on my own, then it would be impossible to spend time with writing code as well. So big thanks for my team, first of all. That would be the biggest proudness. But yeah, to mention a couple of more technical and concrete topics. So I think what I talked about, this Zod thing and what it is capable of, I think I would say the guys who developed Zod can be very proud of themselves. But I think the choice that we made with using Zod, is also something to be proud of. So I think you realize that I was quite enthusiastic when talking about that. So I think that's something I would mention. So the whole flow is very automated. Now it's getting more and more mature. I think this will be a really nice thing. I think this is something that others could also maybe benefit from. So if it can be generalized in a way that it could be used for other APIs as well, then I think it would be also a good candidate to kind of share with others. I'm not saying anything about it because it's not entirely my decision, but I think it's a nice candidate for a kind of project that others can also use. On the other hand, also we have the testing framework. I didn't talk a lot about it because I have less clue about it than the Zod part. So this is because I didn't deal with it, but another team member led that part. But also this is very nice, and I'm very impressed by the progress and how it gets more and more mature over time, and we cover all the cases and so on. So that's pretty nice. And API testing is not very let's say an obvious and simple thing. So you need to cover a lot of scenarios, and it's not like unit testing that you can just TDD everything and then, apply the best practices, but it has a lot of specific things. So it needs to interact with the whole system. If you want to really make it, end to end, then it needs a kind of separate environment. So it's a lot of DevOps as well, not just writing the code of the test itself. So that's one more thing. And yeah, so currently we are delivering in a very, very, great velocity. So I'm also kind of very, very, satisfied with how we are currently adding more and more endpoints. This is because, we never made the API too ambitious. So people say that there are over ambitious gateways when they kind of solve all the problems in themselves. They have a lot of custom logic, but we never add this to the API. And that's why we are able to deliver endpoints very quickly. So we deliver endpoints, then we make them more perfect. So we extend them. Extending in software is always, easier than modifying something like a contract, for example. That's kind of a disaster. But if you can just, develop with such a mindset, then I think keeping this velocity is easy. So here I'm also quite, proud of the team that we can keep this and keep adding more and more endpoints to the API, and we will do that for the upcoming couple of months as well. So I think the users can be ready for more possible automations and stuff like that.
That's perfect. I was since day one. You probably remember that I was one of those people who were, "Hey, where's the API? When is the API? Give me the API." So
yeah, it took a longer time to actually come out with it first time because we a lot of research and stuff. But now once it's done, we incrementally add more and more endpoints. So I think now it knows more and more. So it's becoming better and better over time.
And the last thing, because you told about things you are proud of, and now it's time for the opposite. Do you think there was either some major fuck up that was done, or maybe not a fuck up, but a thing that you are not so much proud of and you think it would be great to make it better?
Yeah, I would mention two things.
To be honest, just to tell you, I deleted few sites on public few times because I made a mistake. So it happens. It's like a total normal thing to delete stuff and things on public. It happens. So don't be afraid.
Yeah, we basically keep up the right of making mistakes because we are human beings. Even though the API and endpoint development is very easy, it can be still messed up, as you said. So basically, there are two things that I would say I wasn't that proud of, or still not that proud regarding the API. So one thing was one specific event when there was a downtime of one endpoint, I think quite important one. I'm not sharing which one because maybe no one realized, but let's see. So this was kind of independent from the API team, but something happened in the background that made it fail. And this kind of realized the risk of the architecture that, okay, now you depend on a lot of other services, then something goes wrong and something cannot be healed because it's maybe something that is very horribly bad, because if you are having microservices, then you usually have an auto healing or Kubernetes or whatever. And but if there is a bug deployed, then you cannot really protect against it. And it happened once, and it was very tough to kind of get to the end of it. And I think for a couple of hours one endpoint was not working, and this kind of tells, or it leads to the second thing in general, which is the error handling. So currently the API is a little bit less verbose with the errors, and we cannot very, very sophisticatedly handle all the error scenarios at the moment. But this will develop a lot because of we depend on other parts of the system which might not provide necessary information, and we have the initiative to kind of bring this through the whole organization, that we are thinking about APIs as products. So if we actually develop something with the proper error handling, then the API will have the same proper error handling, and no doubts about that. But if there is nothing in the background implemented, then we cannot do too much. So we need to rework those kind of functionalities in the backend side. So if anyone kind of faced this issue already using the API or something like that, then I would say a little bit of sorry for that, and keep ask for a little bit of patience, because we are working on it. We know that there are a couple of things which are not that good, but I think this is how incremental development works. So we will add more and more error handling. But if I want to emphasize something that is negative, then this is it. So, but happy cases work perfectly. So please do everything well, and then it's going to be perfect.
Yeah, but this is kind of the thing that you mentioned about the error handling. It's kind of related to what you mentioned earlier, that this is a totally different way of developing things. It was totally different when we were developing things only for us. So yeah, maybe the error handling wasn't perfect, but we were able inside thanks to communicating with each other, debug it. But now it becomes also available on the outside. So yeah, it's a total shift of how you create stuff, how you maintain it. So it's
a great power with great responsibility, right?
Oh yeah, that's true. So kind of to sum up, I really learned a lot thanks to this. Even if because I work at Kinsta. Like I said, I was one of the people who were really constantly pinging Kristof on. He's like, "Hey, where is the API?"
That's right.
So he probably can show the history, but maybe not. But that. Yeah, but the truth is that I really learned a lot about how adding this feature, because API is nothing else than just another feature, required so many changes, not only in adding new tools to the tool set or hiring new developers, but also totally changing the way how we create things. And while we are talking only about the API, about one feature, this feature also has to affect many other features that were already built, because it stands on it. So it's a part of a bigger system. And this one, in theory, quite easy feature, because you can really find like gazillions of tutorials, like build your public API in 5 minutes. What can go wrong, right? And I'm sure that some people might wonder, so if you can build this API in 5 minutes, why this Kristof guy from Kinsta needed so many days and hours to do a research, right? But that's not about the code itself. It was more about the whole shift, about changing and how this whole company create code, and how many developers we have right now.
That's a good question. I think some a little bit below. It's below 100 for sure, but I think about 50, so somewhere in between. So let's say 70 maybe.
75, to be precise.
Okay.
Preferred, and so it's not easy to change something like this, like with a no, it takes time, and personally, for me, this is one of the most interesting things that I learned, because the tools, some I knew, some I didn't, but really the aspect of how much change adding this little feature, right? required.
I always say that it's not a feature, but it's a new way of interacting with our services, because for a hosting company or for a platform, there can be many ways. I use the word platform more. It's a little bit more general, because, for example, if you think about it, then many platforms, like even these lower level ones like GCP or AWS, they have many ways of interacting. So, for example, they have API as well. They have a CLI. They also have Docker or infrastructure as code. So, for example, you can just write your Terraform and then have everything set up on GCP. So these kind of things are in ways of interacting with services. These are doing the same things, but in different formats, and that's why they fulfill different needs. And of course, as you mentioned, we have developers, a lot of developers, but API and the whole thing, what we build, is not just development, but it's also a lot of kind of operations and how it works on the platform. So just for the API, we actually needed a lot of consideration on how to protect it, how to host it properly, what's the right scale that we can use, what's the mechanism. So of course, these can be very obvious when you have already a couple of examples inside the company, so you just pick whatever was working for the other things. But for a public API, it's still a little bit different all the time, because this is a surface. So this will be kind of a surface that can be attacked by people. It can be abused. You need to do the right way, the rate limitation part, then need to apply some sort of firewall and stuff like that. So all these things has to come from a lot of different minds. So even if I talk only about just the development part and the application layer and coding and documentation and whatever, it's a lot more than that. And so the whole being a developer at Kinsta is kind of similar, because what we are solving is basically a lot of DevOps thing inside the code. So basically, you need to kind of deal with Google Cloud and Cloudflare and whatever we integrate from inside the code. So I think that's why it's kind of a good thing to be a developer at Kinsta, because you learn the two things at the same time, basically. And these are kind of quite cool things, to be honest. Yeah.
Yeah. So thanks for really summing it up. It's and as you said, we just talked mostly from the development part of it, and I'm sure that if I would invite someone from DevOps, we could also spend an hour talking about how it looked from their end. Who knows? Maybe next season. But yeah, for now, I think that it's a great moment to wrap it up. Kristof, thank you again for sharing a lot of knowledge. I really hope that others who are also thinking about adding their public APIs, or maybe they already have their public APIs and are thinking how to make them better, learn something from it. Also, I'm sure that if you would like to ask Kristof something, he's on LinkedIn, and I'm sure he will be happy to respond at least to some of the questions, because he's really busy. but yeah. So Kristof, again, thank you so much for spending your time, and thanks to everyone who watched or listened to us. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to leave a sub on YouTube or follow us on Twitter or whatever you want. And yeah, I think that's it.
Thank you very much for the opportunity.
Oh, it was a pleasure. It was a pleasure. I mean, it was really amazing. Thank you, Kristof. So everyone, have a great day or night, because yeah, it depends where you live. So bye, everyone.
Bye bye.